Okay, what's up, everybody? Pastor Matt here. Thanks for checking into my live chat. Today is March 9th, 2020. It's a beautiful Monday afternoon here in Butler County, Pennsylvania. I already took a nice 2-mile walk with my beautiful wife outside. The sun is shining. It is just absolutely gorgeous outside. And I want to thank you for joining me. This worked out well last week, and I thought, man, we should do this again. This was so much fun. To do these live chats, I love to take the questions. We've got questions being taken from Facebook, from my YouTube community spot on my YouTube page, and of course, people have messaged me and sent me emails as well. So we're going to get to all those questions to the best that we're able. If somebody would real quick make a comment in the live chat and let me know that my audio is coming through fine, that would be wonderful. I see there's a few of you out there watching in the outer reaches of the interweb. Ben says it looks good. Thanks, Ben, for checking in. So what's up, everybody? My name's Matt Everhard. I'm the pastor of Gospel Fellowship PCA in Valencia, Pennsylvania. And if you are anywhere north of Pittsburgh, please come check us out. Come worship with us at Gospel Fellowship PCA. We're a Bible-believing, Reformed church. We love Jesus. We're on a mission to share the good news of the gospel with the world. And if you're anywhere near Pittsburgh, Butler County, City of Butler, anything like that, come worship with us. That would be great. In fact, since I've been saying that in my introductions, I've had people coming to the church half the weeks. This last month, I've had a couple different occasions where people showed up and said, hey, thanks for inviting us. Here we are. So that's fantastic. Thank you for that. Also want to mention this. We just started a new marriage Bible study in our church for our Sunday school. It's a little booklet I made called The Lord and the Rings. You can get this on Amazon.com. Just do a search for my name, Matthew Everhard, at Amazon, and you'll find this and several other works that I've written. This is just a couple of bucks. It's a great Bible study working through a bunch of the major passages in Scripture, both Old and New Testaments, dealing with the concept of marriage. So if that's relevant to you, you could do it as a personal study. You could do it as a study with your fiance or your spouse, your wife, your husband. Perhaps a Bible study at church, maybe a small group fellowship. All of that would be just fine. So go grab that on Amazon.com. Okay, we have a lot of questions today, and we'll go for half an hour or so, maybe 45 minutes, depending on how interesting the discussion is. I'll try my best to answer your questions. I took the ones that came to me in time to get prepped a little bit for this live chat, but you could also comment in the live stream. Maybe I'll take a few of those afterwards, although I did give some preference to the Facebook and the YouTube community page question. So let's get right into it. Carolyn F. says, hi there, thanks for all your great content. Please speak a bit about ecumenism and striking a balance between being faithful to your denominational convictions, but ecumenical in your community, extended family and job, etc. All right, so I love that question. Thanks for asking, Carolyn F. By the way, Carolyn F. is awesome, and we're friends on Facebook, so thanks for that great question, Carolyn. Thanks for liking my content, for the kind words, appreciate that. So I take ecumenism fairly importantly. Ecumenism, to define it, is the idea that Christians of various backgrounds, stripes, denominations should do fellowship and service together from time to time. That's important as a witness to the unity of the body of Christ. And so the first thing that comes to my mind, of course, is that beautiful prayer from the Lord Jesus Christ in John chapter 17, called sometimes his high priestly prayer. That's the name of the prayer. It's not actually called that in Scripture itself, but a lot of Bibles will label it like that. Theology refers to it as the high priestly prayer. And in that prayer, Jesus prays rather ardently that his people would be united. In fact, throughout the Gospel of John, there's several different occasions where Jesus talks about unity as being one of the visible signs of the veracity of our faith. And so you should be unified with other Christian believers out there. And before we talk about ecumenism, let's talk about ourselves, our own lives and hearts. We should be fellowshipping with a local body of Christian believers. That's the first step towards ecumenism, or unity within the body of Christ, is that we ourselves are unified with a local congregation. So I'd stress that. And then secondly, I'd stress that in terms of my own denominational tradition, Reformed Presbyterianism does have a globality to it, if I could coin a term. Regionalism, a connectionalism, because Presbyterian churches join together in what's called presbyteries, where churches in a region agree to do fellowship together. And then those presbyteries agree to do fellowship together on a broader national or even global level. So we have unity built into our denominational structure, which would make us a little bit different from non-denominational churches or some fundamentalist churches, which separatism is their primary identity. And I do think that it should be resisted, although I do value in fundamentalism at least their high adherence to strict orthodoxy, which sometimes prevents them from fellowshipping with other churches. But I think Carolyn's question actually has to do more with, do we fellowship outside of our own denominations? Is there a value to that? And again, I would say it is. And there is a great value. And here's the general rule that I would place on unity within the body of Christ, is that we should strive for as broad of unity as possible, as long as we are working together on issues about which we agree. So let me give you a couple of examples where I've seen ecumenism work beautifully in my setting. So one of them would be in regards to the pro-life ministry. I have near and dear people to my heart that work in the pro-life ministry. And that is such a battle within our culture that we Christians cannot afford to be denominationally stratified on that particular issue. We must band together. The voice of the enemy is so dark and so hostile. If you listen to some of the quotations from the recent pro-abortion rally, it comes across as almost demonic in their fervor. Abortion is the sacrament, of course, of the secular, unbelieving world. They'll fight for it tooth and nail. Well, we Christians need to unify on this issue. And I say the broader coalition we can put together in terms of an ecumenical voice on pro-life positions, the better. So you don't have to work in pro-life ministry very long to realize that you're probably going to be mixing Protestants and Catholics together quite a bit. You're probably going to be mixing Pentecostals and non-Pentecostals together quite a bit. You're going to have to put together a coalition from across denominational spectrums if you're going to do good in your community for the sake of the gospel in relation to the pro-life ministry. So I love it when I see like a pro-life march, for instance. Some of my family and church went to the pro-life march in Washington, D.C. back last month, and it was an extraordinary witness of Christian unity across denominational lines. Tons of Roman Catholics, tons of Protestants of various stripes, Baptist, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, Methodist, Independent, Fundamentalist. They were all represented, but largely Roman Catholic, which is the most organized pro-life organization in the world, like it or not. That's absolutely true. The Roman Catholics have extraordinary unity and organization when it comes to that particular issue. So that would be one area where I've seen ecumenism work well. Another would be locally in terms of a ministerial association amongst pastors in a particular city. Now, I haven't found this quite yet in Butler County, Pennsylvania, but it's only because I'm new to the area. Perhaps it already exists and I'm not aware of it. But I would simply say when I was in Brooksville, we had an incredible ministerial committee meeting. It wasn't a denominational thing, it was ecumenical. And so again, we had a broad coalition, various different pastors. We could disagree on almost everything related to Calvinism and Arminianism, in relation to the spiritual gifts, even women in leadership. And I've got positions on all of those things, trust me. But we pastors met together, we prayed for the good of our churches, we earnestly sought revival. We would work together in as much as we were able. We worked together, especially in the area of the homeless, which is here's another area where unfortunately Christians aren't as unified as we need to be. And we need to get on the stick when it comes to being unified, standing together, working for the homeless in our communities. So it was really cool down in Brooksville. We would have various different churches that did homeless feeding ministries, shower ministries, all kinds of transportation ministries. We would coordinate, we would talk to each other, we would help each other out. In the South, at least in Brooksville, there was homeless people everywhere. You looked into any wooded area and you're likely to see a blue tarp. And a blue tarp isn't a trash dump, that's somebody's home. And so we had to work together as the churches for the good of the homeless. And I would love to find a community that's ecumenical like that up here in Pennsylvania. Haven't found that yet, but I'm not saying it doesn't exist. it probably does exist, and I probably need to find it and get involved in that. The final thing I'll mention in relation to ecumenism, which I've appreciated, are some of the larger conference ministries. Now, these can be touch and go depending on which one you're talking about. I think a ministry like Ligonier does an excellent job of drawing in churches from various denominations. Now, of course, as soon as I say that, somebody's going to bring up the fact that they are Reformed and Presbyterian in terms of their conviction. Yes, I grant that. But if you were to do a survey of the people that attend Ligonier conferences, you're going to find a broad panoply of people from various backgrounds who've come together to study the Bible and think on the deep doctrines of the Protestant Reformation. But even having said that, Ligonier has intentionally utilized some other voices lately with Steve Lawson and other Baptists coming into the official teaching fellowship that they have there. I've enjoyed that. Now, the Gospel Coalition, I've been to that as well. I'm hoping the Gospel Coalition stays moored to the faith and doesn't stray too far into the social justice issues. It does seem like they've been hedging a little bit that way lately. And honestly, I don't read it as much as I should to be current on those issues. But I have been to one Gospel Coalition conference before, and I found it was a great encouragement, and the preaching was quite good. All right, second question. This is from Christian78. From YouTube. This is a YouTube comment, and he says, what are your thoughts on Revoice? Okay, well, I have a lot of them. Revoice, if you're not familiar, unfortunately has been linked to my denomination, the PCA, and perhaps a little bit unfairly, but let's talk about whether or not that's fair. First thing you need to know is that Revoice is a movement that is exploring what we might call alternative sexuality. It's part of what is called side B Christianity, which is a brand new term. And I get a little agitated when we coin new terms in Christian theology. But side B Christianity certainly does not represent my position. My position would be much more represented by the larger catechism's teaching on the commandment on adultery. But nevertheless, side B Christianity essentially teaches that homosexual tendencies, urges, longings, desires may not in themselves be sinful, though the act of homosexuality is. Now, hold on one second here, because my phone was going off like crazy the last time I did a video, and it ruined the video. So I am muting my phone. So if you need me right now, better be life or death, all right? So I'm not a side B Christian. I don't believe in the theology that undergirds Revoice. In fact, I think it's dangerous to the church. And I really hope that it distances itself from its having been yoked to the PCA. Now, why has it been yoked to the PCA? Is it an official PCA movement? Is it an official PCA conference, platform, doctrine? Absolutely no. Unequivocally, no. Revoice is not officially linked to the PCA. So why do people associate it with that? Well, because the first annual Revoice conference was held, unfortunately, at a PCA church. And I think, in my view, big mistake. Big mistake to try to associate orthodox, historic Christian positions on sexuality with something novel like side B Christianity. I don't think that was a healthy thing. I think it was a big mistake. Mistakes were made everywhere. The Missouri Presbytery did do an investigation on this, and their initial report was somewhat wishy-washy. I don't think anybody was happy with it necessarily. But just the other day, more events unfolded with regard to Revoice. The same church, Memorial Presbyterian in St. Louis, that hosted the initial Revoice conference, once again on their own campus, I cannot believe they did this, but they hosted a play, I think it was, some sort of performing arts seminar called Transluminate, which is exploring transgenderism and other issues of sexuality. Again, big mistake. I cannot believe they did this. And once again, a new investigation has been launched by the Missouri Presbytery into Memorial Presbyterian Church. And hopefully we can smack the hand as a Presbyterian denomination, Reformed, Orthodox, and historical, for those who would be flirting with these kinds of ideas, because I do think that they are dangerous to the church. In other words, all that to say, I am not in favor of Revoice. I am not in favor of Transluminate. I wish it could be snuffed out from the association that it unfortunately has with the Presbyterian Church in America, my denomination. but we'll see. Now, let me add this. The Presbyterian system is slow when it comes to issues of church discipline. We do have a fairly rigorous process of church discipline, which is played out at all three levels of our organization: local church, Presbyterian, General Assembly, but it does take some time. We don't immediately kick in doors like some sort of a John Calvin SWAT team and start, kicking people around. I'm making an analogy, I suppose. But we do have a very formal disciplinary process, which will take some time. And I'm trusting in the sovereignty of God and the goodness of the process, biblical as it is, following the guidelines of Matthew 18, that the PCA will be able to finally root out the Revoice issue. But it has certainly plagued us. It has certainly embarrassed us as a denomination. And if you or those in your church have participated in Revoice, I would say, please do the right thing and distance yourself from the PCA, because it has largely been an embarrassment to our denomination. But is it widespread? It's really not. It really is quite local. There's one particular church that has been involved in this, and perhaps there's some sympathy for the movement, but I don't see it largely as a threat. I think it's going to work itself out through the church courts. Okay, third question. Tyler J. My homeboy, Tyler J. What is up, my man? Thank you so much for the question. His question is, what is your eschatological view? Well, if I didn't already get myself into trouble in the last question, let's go ahead and jump into the fire here, out of the frying pan and into the fire. So I am what might be considered a historic amillennialist. I would like to qualify that as that I am a very optimistic amillennialist, or perhaps a pessimistic postmillennialist. So either way, here's what I mean by that. I'm fairly optimistic when it comes to my understanding of the gospel being successful in saturating the nations. I think that the Great Commission, Matthew 28, and the work of the church is largely going to be a global success. I look forward to the fulfillment of Revelation 7:9, that every tribe, tongue, nation, and people will be represented in that great worship service in heaven. So I'm very, very optimistic and hopeful when it comes to the fulfilling of the Great Commission. Perhaps even in our lifetimes, though, I would certainly resist any sort of pin placing in terms of chronological framework. I think when it comes to eschatology, if you want to declare yourself a heretic as quickly as possible, start picking dates for the return of Christ, and you will quickly get yourself into big trouble. So I would never do that. I do think that the return of Christ is largely unknowable, although Christ gives us certainly some indications about the last days. Now, speaking of the last days, don't forget that Hebrews 1 teaches that we're already in the last days. So the last days don't just refer to the 7 years prior to Jesus' return, but actually the entire epoch from the resurrection of Christ until the return of Christ. So according to Hebrews 1 and several other places, we're already in the last days, because we're living in that time in which Christ has risen from the dead, and yet he has not yet returned. So I'm a historic amillennialist, which means that the millennial language we take to be largely symbolic in terms of Revelation 20. And you say, well, how can you take the Bible symbolically? Well, everybody who interprets Revelation acknowledges that there's symbolism there in the book of Revelation. The question is, what is to be taken symbolically and what is to be taken literally? So in this particular instance, I take the phrase 1,000 years to be symbolic of a long period of time. And the Bible does at times speak of 1,000 years as, a symbol for a great amount of time. So the binding of Satan is with respect to his ability to prevent the nations from hearing the gospel. And so this millennial age, actually amillennialism is kind of a misnomer, because we do believe in a millennium. It's just that it's not definitely 1,000 years, but it is the period between Christ's resurrection and his return. So it's kind of a slight misnomer there. In terms of the return of Christ, I have in my eschatology one return of Christ. I do not split it up into a invisible rapture and then a visible return. I think that's a problem. The one thing that I like about amillennialism, optimistically amillennial, is that it's the simplest of all end times schemas. If you drop a huge dispensational chart, you need a whole back wall behind you, like John Hagee or something like that. But amillennialism is the simplest framework, and I think the most naturally read framework from the Bible. If you just sat down, read the Bible, and asked somebody what's going to happen, you'd get the idea that the gospel would go out, that there'd be persecution, trial, difficulty, and hardship, no question about that. Perhaps a large-scale Jewish revival towards the end. I draw that from Romans, book of Romans. But then you'd have the return of Christ as the cataclysmic event, the return, the judgment, essentially coextensive. I don't see an invisible rapture. In fact, 1 Thessalonians 4 makes it pretty clear that his return is anything but invisible or secret, but it is obvious, it is clear, it is dynamic. Couple of book references on this, and I'll post my book references in the description of this video. I would suggest Sam Storms on amillennialism, and there's another book that I can't quite think of the author right now, but I'll think of it and post it in the description later on once this video fully uploads, and I can work on that kind of stuff. All right, so optimistic amillennialist. Now I'm slightly pessimistic when it comes to the secular governments of the world. And this would be why I'm not fully a postmillennialist, because a postmillennialist would be the most optimistic of all. For a postmillennialist, even the governments, the nations themselves are essentially converted and Christianized so that when Christ returns, planet Earth is essentially one large unified Christendom. I struggle with that a little bit more. I see the church as being vibrant, alive, and powerful, although possibly persecuted, hated, and despised. So optimistic with regard to evangelism, but I'm pessimistic when it comes to the conversions of the nation states themselves as such. So that's why I'm not fully a postmillennialist. All right, next question. Jordan R. says, why did I decide to study Edwards and not someone else? Well, you got to pick something, right? And when you decide to be an expert in one thing, you have to make a decision. And one of the first decisions you have to make is, are you going to be an expert narrowly on one topic, or are you going to try to be as broad and as studied as widely as possible? So that's the first decision right there. And the church needs both broad and narrow experts in their fields. So a broad expert would be a guy like David Van Drunen from California, for instance. David Van Drunen has degrees in almost everything. He's got degrees in law. He's got degrees in theology. He's got a degree in mathematics, I think, too, if I'm not mistaken. And the guy just knows a lot about everything. But then again, you have other people like Ken Minkema, who's an Edwards scholar, who's just drilled into his whole life just investing in one scholar like Jonathan Edwards. So one of my decisions was, first of all, should I be broad or narrow in terms of any sort of expertise? And I decided that at least for the time being, I would focus in narrowly on Jonathan Edwards. Now, actually, I've gone through several theological phases in my life, and by that I mean I've taken a particular theologian and read him heavily for 1 or more years. And Edwards wasn't the first person that I did that with. I actually spent quite a bit of time with John Calvin prior to Edwards. And then there's been other times where I've picked a theologian and read a bunch of their works in a row, like Spurgeon I've done that with, Luther I've done that with too. But Edwards, I decided, was going to be sort of my lifetime occupational focus, my study focus. And the reason I did that is because at the time I began to study Jonathan Edwards, I needed what he was saying. When I started reading Edwards, I realized that he's talking about joy everywhere in his writings. Joy, joy, joy. All of his major theses, all of his minor theses, his sermons, he comes back to joy. Even Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God has a section on joy towards the end if you read it carefully. And so I needed that in my life because I was super stressed, and I needed that focus on joy and happiness. So I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Edwards's theology of joy, and it was a delight to study it. So what I did for 3 years is read through all his works and start highlighting places where Edwards is talking about joy and happiness. And I synthesized that, put it together in my dissertation, which, by the way, is available as a book. If you want to go on Amazon.com, again, search my name, Matthew Everhard, and you can read A Theology of Joy, Jonathan Edwards, and Eternal Happiness in the Holy Trinity is the name of that book, published by the Jonathan Edwards Society. So I needed it at the time. Now, I will say it's been a benefit to study Edwards, and here's why. First of all, I'm largely sympathetic to his theology. I would have a hard time throwing my whole life into somebody that I primarily disagreed with. And so I wanted somebody that I could say a lot of yeses and amens throughout their work. I, like most of us, enjoy reading people that I agree with, more so than people that I disagree with. Now, there is a great value in reading people that you disagree with, for sure, of course. I mean, how would you even know what to believe if you didn't, from time to time, read people that you had to, have some sort of friction with intellectually? But I wanted somebody who was a great, great challenge and largely would be encouraging to my soul, could be a model for me of faithfulness as a local pastor, which Edwards is. And then here's the final thing I'll say about Edwards, which makes him so amazing, is Edwards... he's got his hands in everything. So if you want to look at preaching, he's a model preacher as a colonial Puritan. If you want to look at theology, he's written some of the most important works of theology, at least in American history, for sure, with Freedom of the Will, Original Sin, some of his other works as well. But then he's also got missions experience. If you want to do some cross-cultural studies, you can study Edwards as the Stockbridge missionary. And then you've got the whole realm of philosophy, Christian philosophy. Edwards is a philosopher too. And so if you were to line up all of his works, it's a mile long. I mean, literally, there's 26 printed volumes in the Yale editions, and there's like 70, including the digital volumes, which aren't going to be in press. So right here behind me, I've got all my Edwards stuff, or at least a lot of it. And it's going to give me plenty of material for a lifetime of study that I can keep coming back to. All right, so thanks, good question. Andy H., what are your thoughts, suggestions to people who are of Arminian theology and study Reformed theology and starting to switch but aren't 100% certain? Okay, well, I guess I kind of touched on that just a minute ago when I was saying that it's good to read people that challenge you theologically. I'm not even sure how it would be possible to read people that you only agreed with all the time, unless you only read the Bible, because obviously we should agree with everything the Bible says. The question is, do we understand it? But if you're going to read anybody whatsoever, you're taking the risk, aren't you, that they're going to say something that you disagree with. That's just part of what comes in the territory with reading. Now, some people, they avoid that stress altogether by not reading much. But then again, they don't learn anything. So you're always going to encounter some challenge if you're going to read any extra biblical or non-biblical author. So there's that. But the reason that I was attracted to Reformed theology, and perhaps I could just say this in its favor, is that when I got serious about my Bible, I realized that there was a lot of things that I could no longer avoid. I am the kind of person that takes the safe path as much as possible. I'm very conservative in nature, not just politically and theologically, but just as a human being. I don't take a lot of risk. And so for a lot of things, I waited as long as I could to stake my line in the sand. That's a mixed metaphor, I know, but to make my decision. And so when it finally came to predestination, I knew I kind of had to decide, is this free will based or is this God's sovereignty? What I realized is that I could not avoid Ephesians 1 and Romans 9, all the language of election, choosing, God having chosen us, but especially those two passages, Ephesians 1 and Romans 9, drove me unavoidably to the conclusion that predestination is true. It's there, it's in the text. What could I do about it? Free will, on the other hand, although that word is in the Bible in relation to free will offerings, I don't think that doctrine is taught. Trying to think of one passage in which it's in an extended, clear form, free will is taught. Hard to think of one. Well, the reason for that is because free will is actually a Greek philosophical concept that comes from Aristotle, first of all, but was reinvigorated in the Enlightenment period under John Locke and others who taught that the human being, the human consciousness, was essentially a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and that we are who we are based on our experiences and the decisions that we make. But free will as such really isn't taught in the scriptures because, as Edwards points out in the Freedom of the Will, if you were to truly have a free will, that would mean that you act and make volitional decisions without any influence that compels you in any direction whatsoever, that you are entirely and radically free. Well, only God is entirely and radically free from all influence. But us, we have a problem in that we are influenced by our own nature, which is the sinful nature of depravity. So we can't really argue that we're radically free or that we have a truly free, uninfluenced will, as Locke would suggest, because we're already deeply influenced by our sinful nature, which, all things being considered, we decline away from God and incline towards the self. So I had to reject that, and it was biblical study on those texts that compelled me to it. But then, once you begin to study Reformed theology, there are other dominoes that must fall. One of the more obvious dominoes is in terms of ecclesiology, how we should organize our churches. And it just seemed very obvious to me that a plurality of elders is the biblical model for church leadership. Just notice that that's the way Paul says to Titus, install elders in every town. That's what Paul does in the book of Acts when he goes through the churches on the way back at the end of the first missionary journey, as he installs elders, plural, everywhere he goes. And so first it was sovereignty of God in terms of salvation. Then it was ecclesiology, plurality of elderships, and a Presbyterian connectionalism. And then after that, Reformed view of the Lord's Supper. And then after that, Reformed view of baptism. And then after that, a Reformed view of eschatology. And these dominoes just fell, bop, 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 one in a line until, man, I was a Reformed guy. So I would say, if you're even interested in Reformed theology, maybe a good book might be What is Reformed Theology by R.C. Sproul, or, for instance, the book on the covenants by Michael Horton might be a good one to get into as well. Okay, next question. KCF says, what Bible are you preaching from right now? Well, you can tell KCF is from the Bible community. There's a lot of Facebook groups. And to be honest, my YouTube page actually got its start from the Bible groups as I started doing a couple reviews, video reviews of some of the Bibles that I had. They got popular. People started subscribing. Bible publishers started sending them to me for free to do reviews. And so I became a Bible reviewer, kind of almost by accident. But to answer your question, I've got it right here, Casey. I am right now preaching from this one. This is the ESV wide margin heirloom edition. The heirloom line is Crossway's better stuff with their goatskin leather edge-lined Bibles. The wide margin, in my view, is the perfect layout because it has a pretty big text font, and it has wide margins 1 inch on either side. Now, there's a lot of wide margin Bibles out there. I used the Cambridge wide margin for years until I filled it up, and I started a new church, and I just said, okay, I got to start with a blank slate here. I don't want to be re-preaching my old messages from Faith Church Brooksville. I just want to think on some passages afresh, and so I started a new Bible. One of the things I like about the heirloom wide margin ESV is that the inner margin is the same width as the outer margin. And this is a big just pet peeve of mine in Bibles. Why do they always make the outer margin on a wide margin slightly bigger than the inner column? Well, of course, both need to be the same width, and the ESV does that. It's also not so huge like the Cambridge wide margin that I can't carry it easily enough. It's very easy to carry. It's not much bigger than slightly bigger than the ESV thin line, but it's definitely manageable. The only thing I'd say about it is it does have a little bit thinner paper. The Cambridge is awesome, has the best paper ever, but this one has a little bit thinner paper, but that's what makes it lighter, and you just can't have everything when it comes to format. Okay, so that's that. I'll post a link to that in the description of the video as well, but I also have reviews of all the Bibles that I just mentioned. Okay, Joseph C. says, hey, bro. What's up, Joseph? Thanks for the Facebook messages. Now goes into the Facebook messages. You for sure don't ever have to do this, but it would be awesome if you talked about ministry, schedules, balancing time, sermon prep, stuff like that in your video tomorrow. But I love all your content anyway, so no pressure. Thanks for your channel. Well, thanks, Joseph. Nice, kind words there. Appreciate that. Yeah, balancing time is something that I've worked on over my career and got much better at as I've got better at being a pastor. Being a pastor is a lot like any other career in that you get better at it as you go, which is why it's so sad that so many pastors burn out so quickly. Like being a baseball player, you learn to hit fastballs by looking at fastballs. You learn to hit curveballs by taking a bunch of curveballs at the plate. So you get better at being a pastor. And so one of the huge things that you have to do is work out your time management. So very early on in my pastoral career, I made a kind of a basic decision that I would divide my day in 2/3. And I would try to spend at least 1/3 of my day with my family, namely my wife. So if I have to work in the afternoon and I have to be late at church, well into the evening, then I will try to give my wife or family a good morning. If I have an early morning and a late night, try to come home middle of the day, maybe have lunch with my wifey. If I have to work early and work through the office, then I come home, spend time with my family, especially dinner. So thinking of your day in terms of thirds like that, I just always make sure that I try to spend as much time as I can on any given day with my wife and my kids. And that means not being selfish with my personal time, because it's so easy to just, log into your screen and just get away from your family and just kind of like come home and crash because you're exhausted from ministry. But I do try to budget my time, and especially my day off. I have always safeguarded my day off, and you almost have to bend my fingers back to my wrists to get me to do something on my day off, because I just love spending time with my wife and my kids if possible on my day off. Other than that, I've kind of worked through a regular schedule that has worked for me. Now, it might not work for everybody, but let's start with the first day of the week and do Sundays. Get up early, devotions, coffee, go over my sermon, get my family up, get them moving for church. We're in Sunday school, we're in church. We stay almost to the very last person to fellowship with people at church. Go home, crash, eat lunch together, do a family devotion at the table. Maybe we go back if we have something in the evening, youth group, whatever. Monday, day 2, my day off, try to do nothing other than whatever I want to do. Yard work, fix my car, oil change, get the car washed, get the salt off the car, whatever it is. Monday is my day to chill and be with family. Tuesday, in the office super early, up moving at the crack of dawn, already working on the worship service, already taking notes for my sermon. Office day, largely getting stuff done, replying to email. Wednesday, we have church in the evening, so I'm primarily working on my Bible study in the evening most of that day. I begin to have an outline for my sermon by Wednesday for sure. And then I go back to church, teach my Bible study, and go home late at night. Thursday is sermon writing day. That's the day where I primarily write out my manuscript of my sermon. I'm a word-for-word guy, and then I preach it as live as I possibly can. So that requires a lot of prep on manuscript writing. What day? Friday, catch all day. Try to do whatever I can on Friday. Finish my sermon for sure. Get ahead on any writing projects if I can. Newsletters, bulletins, all that kind of stuff. Saturday is my flex day. Try to get breakfast, lunch with somebody. Definitely working on my sermon again. Going into the sanctuary to pray by myself, and hospital visits, whatever I have to do. So that's kind of my schedule. But I'd say this, Joseph, I don't know if your age or if you've been in ministry, if you are in ministry, don't know much about you other than I like your kind words and your compliments. But you get better at it as you go. Okay, a couple more questions here. We're running at 38 minutes already. Forrest says, and this is a response to my previous video on Satan hates your marriage. He says, we need to invest in the quality of the marriage and invest in the quality of the marriage from a spiritual perspective. Much of that is on the man. All politics aside, God designed man to be the spiritual head of the household. The man needs to take the lead in praying with his spouse. If he's weak in that area, perhaps the wife can ask him to lead the prayer some evenings, thereby prompting him. Love it, man. Thanks, Forrest. Forrest is my homie. Forrest is my boy from back home in Ohio, and you are exactly right, Forrest. I could have said a lot more in that video on Satan hating marriage, but Forrest is right that the man has leadership responsibility in the home. One of the things, going back to this little notebook here that I made, Bible study for marriage, if you want to do this, is I always put the onus on the young man when I'm counseling premarital couple, that he is the one that needs to lead his family spiritually. He should be the one that leads table devotions, leads prayers, leads his wife in prayer. I implore you, looks Looks like my connection went bad or something. I don't know if we're going to keep going now. Christian, then I implore you to lead to you are able to. Guys, if you don't know how to do a devotion, you really want to, here's a little book I wrote at the table. This is available on Mankind. And most of all, the symphony of God's new creation as opposed to an assault marriage. I think, okay, Gary, I make your point. Obviously, that is true. Satan's primary assault was to cause man to fall and disrupt his relationship with God. The vertical. Gotcha. Totally agree with you there. Satan caused the vertical disruption between man and God, brought in sin into the world. All I was trying to say in that video is don't forget about the horizontal too, that there was collateral damage, we might say. The vertical damage, yes, but the collateral damage was there as well. And my point in that video is I think Satan delighted in that. All right. Well, I've talked a bunch, and we've gone 40 minutes together, and my connection is warning me that maybe it fell off or something, so I'm not sure if we're even live anymore. Maybe we are, maybe we stopped. I have no idea. But thank you so much for checking in. Again, if you're north of Pittsburgh, come visit us at Gospel Fellowship PCA. Look us up online, 161 McFan Road in Valencia, PA. That would be great. And I will post links to the marriage study, the At the Table devotion, and whatever other books I may have mentioned in the course of this discussion. I'll post those links in the description. So once video is fully uploaded, you can click that toggle down button, hop on Amazon.com and get all of those resources. All right, well, hopefully this whole thing recorded. I don't know if it did, but I'm thankful to be here. Pastor Matt, checking out. Thanks again for being here. Love you lots, and we'll talk to you later.